Hello everyone, I'm Dawn. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for visiting with me today. In this video, we are going to discuss something that's a little bit different from my channel, and that is the Satanic Panic of the 80s. Eric and I recently talked about this subject. He grew up in Kansas, I grew up in Florida, and we both remember Satanic Panic. It was an interesting time to be a teenager. Satanic Panic was kind of a big deal. I remember going to a friend's house for a slumber party, and it was a bunch of us girls, and some of our moms were actually legitimately concerned that we were going to sneak into the woods at night for a little devil worship, or that older boys might try to capture us to sacrifice us as virgins to Satan. No, Mom, we're just going to eat pizza and watch Cujo. That is an actual true story. I remember local churches putting pamphlets on everyone's door in the neighborhood with information on what to look for, the warning signs of satanic worship. And some of those warning signs were an antagonistic attitude, a decline in academic performance, listening to heavy metal music, oh boy, playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and wearing black clothing. That's another oh boy for me. And if your kids are experiencing any of the above, look further for things like pentagrams, black or red robes, adorned daggers, a goblet, black candles, or altar-like decor. I remember my parents getting things like this on their door, like these pamphlets from the church. And I remember because my brother and I made a huge joke out of it. My brother doesn't remember it, but I distinctly remember these crazy pamphlets. And my mom, she rarely read any kind of propaganda, but she read those pamphlets. She was real wishy-washy about the whole thing. Some days she thought it was a real thing, and other days she thought it was BS. It just depended on her mood, and there were a lot of moods with her. Satanic Panic was a widespread panic that mostly took place in the United States in the 1980s. And it wasn't isolated to just the Bible Belt either. It was across the whole United States. And it was pretty much everywhere you turned. Parents believed there was some conspiracy to overtake the vulnerable members of society and turn them into, little devil worshippers. It was a morally motivated panic that spread fear that there was some evil thing threatening the purity, values, and well-being of society. It was perpetuated mostly by media coverage, and one of the most famous purveyors of the hysteria was Geraldo Rivera. Although his influence on the panic didn't come until 1988 with his series Exposing Satan's Underground, when it seemed the panic was starting to slowly die down, but his series reignited the fear and paranoia. Even respected journalists covered Satanic Panic, given the situation credence. A huge aspect of the panic was the claims of satanic ritual abuse. And I'm sorry, I have to spell that word out because YouTube does not like for us to speak candidly about such an important topic. So I'll refer to it as SRA throughout the remainder of this video. The panic involved over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of SRA. The panic is believed to have originated with the publication of the book Michelle Remembers in 1980. The book was co-written by psychiatrist Laurent Pazder and his then patient Michelle Smith, who would eventually become his wife. He used the then controversial and now discredited practice of recovered memory therapy. It is a form of psychotherapy where an unproven therapeutic technique such as hypnosis or past life regression is used in conjunction with sodium amytal, a barbiturate with sedative hypnotic properties to help patients recall deep memories. Sodium amytal was also used as a truth serum in the 80s, but was quickly discredited because the subject can be coerced into having a false memory while under the influence of that drug. The allegations made in the book Michelle Remembers involved physical and SRA for occult or satanic rituals. Michelle Remembers pushed the idea that large intergenerational networks of Satanists were trying to tear apart good American families, or family values. More allegations arose across the United States as a result of the book, and all of it was unsubstantiated. The book presents all the claims as fact. However, investigations into the claims made in the book were never corroborated. Investigators describe the book's content as being based on popular culture and was complete fiction, although it was not presented that way. You may remember the McMartin preschool trials. It was an essay case where members of the McMartin family and their employees were charged with hundreds of acts of SA against children in their care. The case lasted 7 years, and there were no convictions, and all charges were completely dropped in 1990. It was alleged that the SA was for satanic rituals and was the kickoff of the daycare SA hysteria, which went hand in hand with Satanic Panic. Allegations in every SRA daycare case were eventually unfounded, but unfortunately, in a few cases, people were sent to prison. Children from the McMartin preschool trial said that they saw witches flying around, that the children claimed to have traveled through a system of tunnels and a hot air balloon. They identified actor Chuck Norris as a man that mistreated them. Children at the Fells Acres daycare claimed being essayed with large knives, sticks, forks, wands. No physical forensic evidence was ever found. Children at the Little Rascals daycare trial claimed of babies being killed, being taken out on boats and thrown overboard. During these investigations, skepticism and logic were not utilized. They just went out the window. And in many cases, the defendants were poor and couldn't afford a proper defense. Preschool and daycare workers are generally paid very poorly. And the children the allegations were coming from were coached and manipulated by adults. And no one wanted to call children liars. Of course not. So the cases started falling apart with many victims recanting. Several of the investigators and therapists that interviewed the children were found to have used misleading and unreliable methods. There were allegations that resulted in convictions. However, many of the convictions were overturned for wrongful conviction. Even today, exonerations are occurring. In May 2023, Melvin Quinney Jr., his conviction was overturned. In 1989, Deborah Quinney left her husband Melvin after a turbulent marriage, and 4 days later, a complaint to CPS alleging that their children were essayed by their father was made. In 1991, Melvin was convicted of taking indecent liberties with his son, and it was said to be tied to Satanism. Years later, his son recanted. There was no essay by his father. Adults lied and convinced him, and he remembers telling them nothing happened. And that wasn't a good enough answer for the investigators. In 1992, Dan and Fran Keller were convicted of SRA after children from their daycare center accused them of serving them Kool-Aid with blood in it, wearing white robes, cutting the heart out of a baby, burying children alive, and many other ridiculous atrocities. They were released in 2013 after serving nearly 23 years in prison, and they were compensated millions of dollars. With the release of Michelle Remembers and the extensive coverage of the McMartin trials, rumors, pop culture, religious conferences, talk shows, newspapers, and magazines sustained and spread the idea of satanic panic. The panic grew so much that it was researched and is still researched even today. And it's determined to be a moral panic with no true satanic involvement. In the Journal of American Studies in 2017, one researcher stated that this moral panic involved hundreds of accusations that devil-worshipping pedophiles were operating America's white middle-class daycare centers. In the October 31st, 1994 issue of the New York Times, journalist Daniel Goleman states, of the more than 12,000 documented accusations nationwide, investigating police were not able to substantiate any allegations of organized cult abuse. Now, that's not to say all claims were completely false, but they were not ritualistic in nature. Michelle Remembers was just one ingredient in the recipe to create the panic. 3 films, Rosemary's Baby, released in 1968, The Exorcist, released in 1973, and The Omen, released in 1976, were films concerning Satanism or Satan. Rosemary's Baby was literally about a satanic cult, whereas The Exorcist was about demon possession. And The Omen was about the arrival of the Antichrist. And for their time, they were effective films, without the intention to, but still pushing the satanic panic agenda. According to researchers, hypnotized patients recalled memories that were actually just detailed scenes from these films. Also, with the growing popularity of VCRs, as well as cable networks like HBO, movies like this were being seen more and more right inside the home, effectively terrifying families. And remember, it was the 70s. It was past the wholesomeness of the 50s and seeing the end of the peace and love hippie movement. The 70s were the time between the flower child of the 60s and the greed is good mentality of the 80s. Things were changing politically, socially, and culturally. Satanic Panic was as much a political movement as it was a social and cultural one. As the 80s rolled in and the panic started spreading, parents were seeing satanic symbols on our cereal boxes. Elizabeth Arden products were to be avoided because she was a devil worshiper. Some of the more paranoid types thought that our wholesome, pure television shows were sending kids subliminal messages. Bo and Luke Duke wanted us to drink blood and give our souls to Satan. Alf, well, he was a demon. MacGyver, he wasn't really showing us how to escape a locked room with dental floss and a paperclip. He was giving us tools to become Satan's faithful. The executives of Procter & Gamble were also considered devil worshippers. Put a pin in Procter & Gamble. We'll be coming back to them very shortly. The 80s was a time of economic growth, financial prosperity, and it saw a rise in the double income family, which called for an increase in daycare services. This created anxiety about protecting traditional family values and protecting children against unknown dangers. More married women entering the workforce was viewed as the decaying of traditional values. Many entities, like religious leaders, used these fears in an attempt to strengthen the church. We were plagued with social unrest in the 80s. The Tylenol murders, trick-or-treat malfeasance, kidnapped children on every carton of milk, AIDS and the misinformation being spread about it, stranger danger. Fears were high, and there was a very palpable belief that evil lurked around every single little corner. The weird kid was ostracized for being different. Obviously, he worshiped the devil. What else could it be? It couldn't be anything else, right? The development of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, which was founded in 1966 and experienced steady growth throughout the years, with many copycat and breakaway groups, was also part of the recipe. It marked a shift in societal attitudes when Anton LaVey declared Anno Satanas, I don't know if I pronounced that right, a once feared taboo belief system ingrained itself and sparked enough interest to make it mainstream, particularly in California. But it was just one of several countercultures moving away from traditional attitudes. The Tate LaBianca murders committed by Charles Manson's followers and his cult of lonely teenagers also lent itself to the panic. Although the films, The Church of Satan and the Tate LaBianca murders happened well before the 80s, it was the jumping off point for young people who would become parents, teachers, and clergy, politicians, businessmen in the late 70s, early 80s, and these elements would be part of their memories. So the height of the popularity of horror films, heavy metal, and games like Dungeons and Dragons would put it in the public's heads that the youth of America was in trouble and would be taken by Satan. There was a satanic conspiracy permeating American communities. Dungeons and Dragons was a huge target for TV pundits, politicians, religious leaders, and ill-informed parents. They all believed, or wanted us to believe, that Dungeons and Dragons was an entryway to satanic worship. Satanic cults were using mind control with those little die the kids rolled to become Satan's chosen ones. A young prodigy, James Dallas Egbert III, self-canceled himself at 17 years old in 1979. People involved with the young man blamed Dungeons and Dragons. This was another event that helped kick off the Satanic Panic phenomena. In 1985, Patricia Pullen, an anti-occult campaigner whose son was an avid player of Dungeons and Dragons and also self-canceled, and Thomas Radecki, a psychologist and director of the National Coalition on Television Violence, formed BADD, B-A-D-D, Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. The pair saw RPGs, especially Dungeons and Dragons, as satanic cult recruitment tools that led the youth of America to unaliven themselves and others and performing satanic rituals. Other alleged recruitment tools included heavy metal music, television, schools, and movies, to name a few. Unaliven oneself was an increasing issue in the 80s, but the conclusion was it was Satan, not mental illness. But that actually was how believers of Satanic Panic viewed mental illness. It was Satan working inside. The false information about Dungeons and Dragons, heavy metal, films, etc., being satanic cult recruitment tools, were shared at policing and awareness seminars across the country as legitimate causes of concern. If you remember season 4 of Stranger Things, this is addressed, and I can tell you, this did happen in the 80s. My parents, they went to a few of these community meetings concerning these matters. It was a weird time to live in because we were all like, what is going on? But parents were crazy. They really were. In Geraldo Rivera's Satanic Panic episodes of his show, it was claimed that estimates are that there are over 1 million Satanists in the United States, and they are all linked to a highly organized and secretive network. Tapes of the Geraldo Rivera shows and other talk shows were used by religious fundamentalists, therapists, and police to promote the idea of satanic cult's existence. Horror movies like The Evil Dead, Hellraiser, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and 976 Evil were also looked at as recruitment tools, with Hollywood being a hub of Satan worship. It was easy to convince people looking for a reason bad things happened. Violent crime, particularly those committed by young people in the 80s, was often viewed as satanic. And it's easy to see why when looking at the crimes of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. His killing spree was from 1984 to 1985, and he murdered 13 people. He would leave satanic symbols at most of his crime scenes. He drew a pentagram on his hand and made references to Satan during his trial. Though one serial killer claiming satanic ties is not enough for a panic, but where we were at culturally in the 80s, the time of his crimes, it added fuel to the fire already ignited by Michelle Remembers' paranoia over Dungeons and Dragons and the media and films touching on the subject. In the summer of 1984, 17-year-old Rocky Casso, a self-professed Satanist, stabbed his friend Gary Lawers 36 times and cut out his eyes, which the media propagated as ritualized. Jimmy Troiano and Albert Quinones, friends of Casso and his victim Gary Lawers, were there when the crime happened, and they told police that Casso commanded Gary to say that he loved Satan, which he would not say. He said, "I love my mother." The Knights of the Black Circle was supposedly the name of Casso's cult group, but there was no evidence to support that that was true. Because the day Casso was arrested, he was wearing an AC/DC shirt, led to the association between heavy metal and his crimes, even though AC/DC isn't heavy metal, it's hard rock. But hard rock and heavy metal was blamed for crimes believed to be satanic in nature before Casso. Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest, Kiss, Wasp, Def Leppard, Black Sabbath, even Sheena Easton have been blamed for what was believed to be crimes that were satanic rituals. It was rumored that Olivia Newton-John, Prince, even Kenny Rogers, among many others, worshiped Satan. MTV's Headbangers Ball was a late-night show that was created in 1988 in response to the backlash heavy metal was getting from groups like the Coalition on Television Violence and the PRMC. And this would be the only time more intense heavy metal videos would be shown late at night on Headbangers Ball. The hysteria against heavy metal music would influence a string of bad horror movies concerning the fake relationship between heavy metal and Satan. Hard Rock Zombies, Trick or Treat, and Rock and Roll Nightmare, to name a few. In these films, heavy metal was the problem, the root cause of the evil released. Some say the movies were created to make fun of the issue. Some say they were exploiting Satanic Panic for a money grab. Either way, the influence of Satanic Panic couldn't be denied. Satirizing the laughable panic was a tongue-in-cheek response to heavy metal's detractors. Those who believed the hysteria explained how the hidden Holocaust of thousands of people a year being killed by Satanists for Satan by saying devil worshippers have infiltrated media, law enforcement, medical examiners, even morticians, to make sure that the bodies that they had sacrificed weren't found. Satanist women who were in the service of Satan as breeders had thousands of babies for human sacrifices, and because these thousands of births were kept private, there were no reports of missing children. They really believed this, or rather wanted others to believe it. But again, all unsubstantiated. The panic, for the most part, started fading in the early 90s and ended in 1995. In 1995, Geraldo Rivera issued an apology for his television special regarding Satanic Panic. In his statement, he said, "I want to announce publicly that as a firm believer of the Believe the Children movement of the 80s that started with the McMartin trials in California, I am now convinced that I was terribly wrong, and several people were convicted and went to prison as a result. Lives were literally destroyed, but thanks for your apology, Geraldo." And it was the only apology I could find from anyone that propagated the panic. Also, in the mid to late 90s, many lawsuits against mental health professionals were filed for their part in the panic and the treatment or lack thereof for patients who had serious mental health disorders caused by early childhood trauma that was dismissed as SRA. The maltreatment was sometimes real, but oftentimes false memories were created, but the findings didn't point to the actual mental health issues the patient was dealing with. In the 1980s and early 90s, SRA diagnoses obscured actual CA issues in an attempt to purge society of some fake evil. Proven ABUSE cases were ignored or minimized. The real evil was regular people, lawyers, accountants, homemakers. But the children that they mistreated fell through the cracks because the concentration was on SRA. Cult-based ABUSE is viewed as the most extreme SRA. In the early 1980s, cult-based ABUSE described a network of Satan-worshiping intergenerational cabals that were part of a higher organization. They were thought to SA and torture children to coerce them into a lifetime of Satan worship. Basically, what we know today as an actual real problem called human trafficking. It is almost as if categorizing atrocities towards children under Satanic Panic is more digestible than just calling it what it is. And I'm in no way suggesting that these evils don't happen under the influence of a devil, but it was not a result of satanic rituals for the sake of currying favor with the Dark Lord. There has been no evidence uncovered to support claims of a large number of children being sacrificed in satanic rituals. There definitely are cases of extreme sadistic crimes committed by individuals for devil worship, but it was never the widespread problem that Geraldo Rivera, the media, religious leaders, and politicians of the 80s wanted us to believe it was. Ken Lanning, a former FBI agent who worked on hundreds of cases, claimed to be ritualistic, said the evidence wasn't there, but the allegations of SRA never really went away. When people get emotionally involved in an issue, common sense and reason go out the window. People believe what they need to and want to believe. In May of 1985, the popular news show 2020 ran a segment on Satan worship describing animal mutilations, clearly used in some kind of bizarre ritual. rock music associated with devil worship, satanic graffiti and symbolism, satanic messages heard when playing pop songs backwards. Procter & Gamble fought rumors that their moon and stars trademark was a satanic symbol. And the company sued a couple in Topeka, Kansas for spreading the lie that the company was ran by Satanists. The suit contended that James and Linda Newton made libelous and malicious statements about the company, saying it supports the Church of Satan. It also came out that the Kansas couple sold Amway home products, viewing Procter & Gamble as possible competition. In recent years, QAnon has tried to essentially bring back a version of Satanic Panic, but more people today are a lot more sophisticated and knowledgeable and are far less likely to fall for it. But as long as there are weak-minded people, even in very small numbers, Satanic Panic will be around in some way. I doubt we'll ever see it again the way it was in the 80s, but it will always, some level will always be around. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. If you have anything to contribute to the conversation, please do so in the comments. Be kind in the comments and respect one another. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to everyone later. Bye.